Hello my friends, welcome back to the walkthrough crew. This is video number 9, it is cycle 248. A couple things have changed here, and we'll start where we always start by looking at dupes. I have 12 right now, and of course that's because I have enough food, I have enough oxygen for them, so everything is totally fine. Quick checkup on our important resources. I'm going to kill this sage hatch because I don't like them. But I have coal, lots and lots and lots of it. Algae, not so many, lots of it. And my water is doing okay. As you can see, we're getting a little bit of flow in here now. I'm going to explain a little bit of, and you might see some new stuff in here, by the way, so I'm going to explain some of this automation that went in. As I did say earlier, this would get a little bit more complicated, so I didn't have to manage it manually, but I do want to take it slow. I would normally make a big, complicated setup from the beginning, but for a walkthrough, kind of wanted to introduce it a little bit at a time, since you might not be super comfortable with automation. So let's talk about a couple of other things that I skipped over in the last video that I probably should have mentioned. One of which was this oil area. When I talked about it before, I was just kind of like, yeah, well, this is the oil area, yep, that's it. And didn't really do a good job of explaining everything that was going on here. So the first and foremost thing is that you do need these Atmo suits in order to get in here, and an Atmo suit checkpoint next to it. This just means that if a dupe wants to go past this point, they have to have an Atmo suit on. The Atmo suits will require oxygen, so I am pumping it in from a pump from up here. I normally would not do that unless I had a different oxygen source up, so once we get it up in the later videos, we'll be pumping oxygen through our base anyway. I'm just going to hook into one of those lines, rather than powering a totally separate pump for this. No real need to do that if we don't need to. So yeah, secondly, there is a bit of a liquid lock here. And this is a tactic that a lot of people use that I think is a really good idea to prevent gas exchange between the two sides. You can see there's natural gas on both sides because I had to open this up for a bit. But if there were things like sour gas or a lot of carbon dioxide down here, especially with the temperature that it's at, I don't want this to be flowing back in here and polluting my base with stuff that doesn't need to be there. So that's what this is all about. If you were wondering what that was, that's definitely what it's for. So yeah, other things to mention about this oil area is if you don't have a big pool of oil to start off with, you can start using these oil reservoirs. All you need is a utility to actually get in there and get it, which is this oil well. You do have to spend water and a little bit of power and some dupe time on this in order to continually produce oil, but that could be a thing. But yeah, I'm not going to use that until I've gotten all the naturally occurring oil out here, just because it's easier for me to get to that rather than hook one of these up. Yeah, so just wanted to make sure we talked about that a little bit. I did get my plastic production up in the meantime, and I wanted to also explain what the purpose was of that, because I kind of glossed over it last time. So the whole point of the game in general, well, I guess you could say there's lots of points of the game, but there's a list here of things that you're going to want to do in order to quote-unquote win the game. These first 3 are things you're probably going to do anyway in a normal playthrough. Those should be the easiest ones to obtain. Building a great monument is going to take a ton of steel, a ton of plastic, a ton of ceramic, a diamond, and all kinds of random stuff. So that's something that we're going to do as well, but it's not the hardest one. The hardest one is breaching the temporal tear. And what that really means is that we need to get access to this star map, which means that we eventually need to get out into space so that we can do all that stuff. But if you look at space, the distance from my base and to space is ridiculously long. So if I'm building stuff out there like rockets and solar power and other fun stuff that goes on there, it's a ridiculously long travel distance. I don't want to do that by foot. So the thing that I will usually want to do is I will research transit tubes, which are right here, and they take a lot of plastic. So that's why I want a lot of plastic throughout the game. Second reason why I want plastic is because it gives me access to different sensors, like this germ sensor, for example, requires plastic, and also this vent down here, which I installed, also requires plastic. This vent in particular allows me to store a lot more natural gas in a setup like this, and this will only get overpressurized at 20 kilograms per tile, which is a lot. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure I recap some of that stuff before we move on to our bigger projects here. And the biggest project is going to be, this room is going to be fleshed out a lot. There's going to be a lot of big heat producers in here, and of course we need to cool that. So if you look at the temperature overlay, this is not very good. Like, a lot of these are sitting at like 170 degrees, and that's really not where I want to be. So I've been kind of panicking a little bit to try to get this thing cooled. And yeah, you can continue to mine out ice like I talked about in this chamber, but I also mentioned that getting to that ice can be pretty hard So I've kind of mined out some in here, but it's only going to get harder the longer I go. I'm going to have to keep digging up this biome. It's going to take forever. I don't want to have to keep doing that if I don't have to. And if I have the power to push it, I would rather go for a more sustainable, energy-intensive cooling solution that's going to save my dupes time from digging and traveling and all that stuff. So that's what this is. Looks like a complicated setup, so I'll explain this one bit at a time. This top setup in particular, minus these power transformers, this is going to be something you're going to do a whole bunch of times throughout this phase of the game, because this phase of the game is really about tapping into as many energy sources as we can get, so that when we have these huge power requesters, like the transit tube accesses, for example, they will request a ton of power, that we have the power to push it and we don't run out because we were not paying attention to that as much. So that's what this phase of the game is going to be about, but I really need to cool my base. And you're probably going to need some kind of cooling on this caliber before you start getting into new oxygen sources, new power sources, and all that too. So that's the whole point of this. So one thing at a time. So problem, we have water that's too warm. We want this to be colder. I would ideally want this down around maybe like 35 degrees, which is barely above freezing for clean water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a second pump. I've not configured this temperature setting yet, so we can just set it to something ridiculous. We'll do that later. But I have a separate pump that's going to pump water, polluted water, down into this Thermo Aqua tuner, which we've talked about a few times. What this does is it lowers the temperature of whatever is sent in by a set amount, but it also will exchange that heat and put it somewhere else. So like, it will be absorbed into this device, for example. So I am making them out of steel, but you need to put them in a room in which you can absorb the heat and potentially deal with that heat. And that's what this turbine is for, and that's what this vent is for. So what's going to happen is I'm going to first suck out all the oxygen in the room. I don't want any air in there. I'm going to open this because that's where I'm going to be blowing all the excess oxygen. And I'm going to wait until this is totally a vacuum before I turn everything on, and then I'll eventually turn this pump off. What I'm also going to do in the meantime is I'm going to start letting water in so that... Whoops, I need to connect this pipe. Who did that? But I'm going to open this liquid vent over here, and water is going to start flowing from this new pump that I added. This pump is in an area that I know is clean water, but it's water that I don't care what temperature is. It could be hot, it could be cold, whatever. It doesn't matter to me. I'm going to eventually be using this later to generate oxygen from, but yeah. So that line is running down into this room. It starts filling up the room with water. What's going to happen is this is going to heat up so much that it's going to start to boil this water and turn it into steam. Once the steam gets hot enough, it's going to go into this steam turbine, and it's going to be cooled and turned back into water and eventually put down into this pipe and back into the room. So as this heats up, this is going to be what cools it down. This combination of two items in the game is one of the most powerful combinations in the game for cooling, especially, because that's exactly what this is for. So I can cool all kinds of stuff in this. I can cool polluted water. If I wanted to, I could make this cooling setup out of like oil or ethanol. Those are all totally viable solutions for cooling throughout the game. I also have a second one here that's not hooked up to anything yet. And I put it in here just in case I need it, because I could wind up not wanting to use ice for this anymore. I could start using the Aqua tuner rather than ice if I get tired of having my dupes to run this back and forth. So that's another option, or if I wanted to cool something else, I can totally do that. Another thing I could potentially do is I could just hook this up to a loop with my metal refinery and just keep all the liquid that's going into this refinery directly hooked into this Aqua tuner so that I don't have to worry about any excess heat being generated here. I could even move this over if I really wanted to. There's a lot of stuff I could do. Yeah, so I just want to kind of explain all the different working parts of that. Something that you're going to want to pay attention to is that if this is generating energy, and it's capable of generating a lot, I want to hook it up to these heavy watt wires. So I have run heavy watt wires over here, which is going to be pretty common for those. But I'm also not running the heavy watt wire inside this room, because this tile is going to be terrible for retaining heat. This is going to allow a lot of heat exchange. And if this is going to be like 250 degree steam in here, I don't want this imparting its heat on everything else whatsoever, and I don't want it imparting into this room, because we need to keep this room cool. So this steam turbine, while it will destroy heat, it will still generate a lot of heat and kind of dissipate it out. It's some kind of ratio that's really favorable. It's like 90% of the heat is basically destroyed, and the rest, the remaining 10% kind of gets put into this object. But we do need to keep this room cool. So I do have a loop coming from my cooling loop, just like we do for our hot room. where the water sits in here, and as soon as it gets too hot from this sensor, if it's like above, let's say 80 degrees, I'm going to start cycling the water, which we can see right now. And I do make these out of radiant pipes so that we exchange the temperature as much as possible. I also did start putting radiant pipes in here because this was getting really, really hot. We'll probably eventually make this all radiant pipe, which is another benefit of being in the oil biome. You start to get lead for free. You can make all these out of lead. Lead's not the greatest material for building out of, but for building like pipes, especially things you don't expect it to melt, which is like 600 degrees, lead's great. So that's what this is for, and that's what these power transformers are for, so I can just run power down to these aqua tuners without making the room exposed. I've made everything out of ceramic, so that's going to really protect me quite a bit from the heat that's in here. This is almost entirely vacuumed out, by the way. This much water is fine. You can keep going if you want to. I'll let this run for just a little bit, and then we'll actually see this full loop in action. For what it's worth, I do have a separate vent for bringing the water back that's been cooled. So it comes from this pipe, it goes into the aqua tuner, it comes out, and it drops out of a separate vent from all of my other cooling things, because I want to keep this as clean as possible in these pipes so that this can be running 100% of the time if it needs to. So it looks like everything's a vacuum, so I'm going to turn off my switch here. I'll turn off the switch for the vents so that that'll be closed in case I want to introduce other gas to it later. And now that there's enough water in here and there's no oxygen or anything like that, I'm going to turn this pump on. So I'm going to say if this water is ever above, let's say 35 degrees, then I want it to be pumped in there. And it'll get pumped in and dropped out here, which will eventually cool this whole thing. And then once this thing gets colder, I'll be able to actually control the temperature of this room better. It will keep my steam turbine cool, and I can hook a whole bunch of stuff up to this setup over time. Like, for example, the oxygen setup that I'm going to put here in just a little bit. So yeah, that's all I have for the aqua tuners. This setup is going to be something I'm going to use in space and something I'm going to use for a few other things. So this steam turbine and aqua tuner setup, get used to it, because I think you're going to have to use it quite a few times throughout your time playing this game. This video is getting pretty long, so I'm going to try to breeze through this next part. The next part and the last thing that I have is the automation update that I have for my water. And I know what you think every single time you look at something like this is like, this is too complicated, I'm not going to pay attention anymore. But I wanted to slowly introduce you to different parts of automation, because stuff like this is so much more helpful than me having to flip switches manually to control all this. So what I have set up here is I need to automate when this door opens, I need to automate when this liquid tepidizer turns on, and I need to automate when this door opens. So this door is going to open whenever this room needs water. So that's what this sensor's for. It's also going to open whenever there's no germs in this water. So if those two things are true, it's going to keep this door open for about 60 seconds, allowing flow to go down in here. So that part seems pretty straightforward, and that's what this section of automation is right here. Likewise, I need a rule for when this door can open. So I want this door to open when there's not enough water in this room, and when this door is shut. I don't want to create a full flow of water between these two. So this door can only be open when this door is shut and when this room needs more water. So I have a hydro sensor here, as you can tell, for a part of that. And then I'm just listening to the same signal that's opening this door and inverting it before it goes in here. So if those are true, I'm going to keep this open for about 60 seconds, just like the other door. I think it might be less. It's actually 45. And then the third piece of this is when to turn on this liquid tepidizer. So I want to turn on this liquid tepidizer when the water is not already warm enough. If the water gets warm enough, it'll start killing germs, which you can see here. It's dying at 32% dead per cycle because it's at a heated up temperature already. So if the water is too cold, and if there's germs, I want to turn this on. So you can accomplish all this with a fairly simple setup, and it looks a lot more intimidating than it actually is. But this type of setup is going to be something we use in space. It can be something you can use for water. You can use it for a whole bunch of other stuff around the map. And this is all in the name of just saving your own attention or saving energy or something like that. So I'd really recommend getting familiar with the automation overlay. And this is just a small example into the complicated ways that you can use it just to help save you time or be more effective or whatever. So yeah, so now we have this aqua tuner running, as you can see. And this water, I'm going to shut this off, by the way, this is plenty of water. This water is coming in at pretty cold, but you can see even around the aqua tuner it's already in the 60s, whereas the water that just came in is still in the 50s. So this is going to heat it up pretty fast, and that's fine as long as I have a way to deal with that heat, which is what the steam turbine's for. It's going to take way too long to heat up all this water, so I'm not going to do it in the scope of the video, but by the next video you should be able to see that. And of course I'm only able to do this because I have excess power. I have enough natural gas to push this. I have my petroleum generators in case things really go wrong. I can go capture extra natural gas, which I had before, which actually it looks like I had a leak from this room earlier, which is why all this natural gas is out here. So I can hook up this room, I can hook up this one. Once it goes dormant, I can actually surround that. So yeah, there's a lot of excess power to be had here, so more of those sources will be coming up. But the next video is mainly going to be dealing with getting off this algae and onto more renewable oxygen. It'll be right here. I'll show you a simple setup for that. It's going to have some level of control with these switches and doors and stuff, but I'll explain the build once we get there. Once again, this video is getting a little long and I don't want to ramble for too long, so I'll just end it with the typical. If you have any questions or any comments about anything, please leave them down in the comments section. I'll more than happily answer them. Appreciate you guys watching. I'll see you soon. Have a good one.